Well, thank you very much for having me here. I am, of course, John, the only Protestant here. Thanks a lot for warning me about the secular takeover of America, because prior to that conversation, I was only worried about the Sharia takeover of America. Why would the state of Oklahoma have passed a law saying don't use Sharia law in Oklahoma unless there was an obvious and clear and present danger that this was happening? The other thing I worry about, Barbara mentioned it too, I was also worried about those chimeras, those animal hybrids. Like, I'm particularly worried about the spider, giraffe, human one, that we're a hair's breadth away from creating that. So thank God we're worried about the right things in this country. The Sharia law thing, William Murray, not Bill Murray the comedian, but William Murray, the born-again son of the late great atheist Madalyn Murray O'Hair, now has formed yet another new group just to fight Sharia law in America. So he had a booth up recently at a big conference here in Washington. Originally, as I understood it, this panel was supposed to be just about evolution and science, and I'm not a scientist. Occasionally I talk about science on television, but you know, you can talk about anything for 2 minutes on television. I am a minister in the United Church of Christ. I am a member of the Supreme Court Bar, minister, lawyer. This means I can, for example, forgive you for any indignity you posed to me or create for me this morning. I can forgive you for it over lunch, go home this afternoon and sue you anyway. So don't screw around with me. But I'm glad we expanded the scope of this so we can talk about some of the other issues and institutions where the religious right is interested in taking over our rights. On the other hand, just in the odd event that perhaps anybody would be foolish enough to ask me a question about evolution, I brought this with me. This is, well, I call him my science advisor. And he represents two things. Not only is this monkey, of course, shares with us a common ancestor. That's what evolution's all about. That's what descent with modification's all about. But he also represents, in his own crude way, just what the religious right thinks about evolution. That is, it was created by Satan. Thanks a lot. He plays a dual role. I give him 2 bananas by 1 o'clock. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I once gave a PowerPoint presentation in Ohio, went home and got sick with the flu, thus proving absolutely, scientifically, that PowerPoint causes viruses. So I don't do that anymore. A couple of you that will be speaking later, including Chip, were at the Values Voter Summit, sponsored by a gentleman whose picture was up here not too long ago, Tony Perkins, who runs the Family Research Council. And you're smart people, so what's the opposite of a Values Voter Summit? What's the opposite of a summit? Okay, I'll tell you. I'm sure you would have come up, a nadir. You know, I used to say, like, Ulysses S. Grant's administration was the nadir of national disgrace. Well, that's kind of what it was. I've been going to these things, and Chip's been going 20 years. You'd think we would be insulated from just walking away and wanting to stick a needle through our heads. But we're not. We're not. It gets worse and worse and worse. And of course, this year, the master of ceremonies, a man named Gil Mertz, and he looks just like you think he does. Gil stands up there and he said, I have one rule. This is the most important rule of the whole event. It's got 5 words. Don't be the crazy one. In other words, don't do something wacky that the New York Times or MSNBC is going to notice and put into the media. You don't have to look too far, actually. I think Gil may have been blinded by the lights coming at him, not noticing, for example, several people in their tri-cornered hats and Revolutionary War uniforms who were sitting in row number 2, standing up like this all the time. They didn't allow guns, apparently, into the facility. Here's what I want to do. I could tell you a lot of stories about that, and maybe some folks this afternoon are going to do that, but I'd prefer to talk about some themes that I learned, and I do not want to disappoint those persons who you know, who are taking notes and who write down stuff on PowerPoints because I don't have mine. So I'm going to tell you what the points are. that I would make if I had a PowerPoint, so that we know where we're going with this. First, I want to talk about something from the Values Voter Conference, a general discussion about hypocrisy and conflation, the conflation of the Bible and the Constitution. Secondly, I want to talk to you about what are apparently going on all over America, Christocentric panic attacks, anxiety attacks for which no drug is sufficient to cure you. Third point, it's religion stupid. We'll get to that in a minute. By the way, the order is important. I don't want anybody on the right to go, yeah, Lynn said religion is stupid. I mean, you may say that, but I'm not going to say that. And then finally, nobody is perfect, a reference to our incumbent president, one Barack Obama, who used to be Barry Obama. He changed his name. I'm kind of glad he did most days these days, because he's not been helping us too much. First, let's go to starters for the Values Voter Conference. It starts out, remember, 3 members who are speaking there, 3 of the candidates for the Republican Party who are coming to this event, believe that God has told them to be the next president of the United States. And I know what that means, because I am a mathematician of sorts. That means at least 2 of them are wrong. And I'm kind of guessing all 3 are wrong, but that's the predicate to the whole event. Like, why in the heck did some of those people even come? God picked 3 of them and gave them the message. This is the same God that presumably told Mike Huckabee, don't run, stay on Fox television, and finish building that mansion down in Florida. Same guy. So, that's the predicate of it. That's a problem for starters. There's a certain level of amazing hypocrisy at this event, and it's similar ones all over the country, and they are holding these things all over the country. Back in the 1950s, I remember seeing ads on my television. My television, what really was my parents' television, it was small, it was black and white, it was a circle. It wasn't a screen, it was just a circle. Some of you remember those, black and white only, no color. And there were ads on in the 50s where they'd show a group of people, and then somebody would go, stand up and be counted in the fight against communism. Remember those ads? Yes, some of you remember those ads, and people would all rise up and do that. Well, there's a similar thing going on at the Values Voter Conference, except it wasn't communism, it was Obamacare. Every time somebody would talk about the president's health care plan, they would refer to it as Obamacare, and then just mentioning the word, particularly if followed by the phrase, when I am president, I will repeal every word of it. Or I will destroy this plan, or I will dismember. I don't know if they really said dismember, but you get the point. They really did want to get rid of this. And people would just climb up and applaud and raise their hands to heaven, because that has become the code word for hating everything. Now, Obamacare, then they'd always say this. We hate Obamacare because, among other things, it puts the government between the patient and his doctor. That sounds good. I don't want the government in between myself and my doctor. I have enough trouble just finding a doctor. I'm even married to a doctor. I certainly don't want the government between me and her. But then wait, something's weird. As soon as they'd finish that, they'd start talking about abortion. And then, of course, not only do they want the government between a patient, her and her doctor, they want the state literally to be able to criminalize the act of making a choice to have an abortion for any reason at any time in any state in America. So there's a kind of hypocrisy there that troubles me, you know, because I'm one of those dumb people who believes that consistency occasionally does matter and is not the hobgoblin of small minds. Another strange conflation that we see is the conflation between the Bible and the Constitution. You know all these guys, including the Tea Partiers and the religious right. I thought, even 2 years ago, I thought there might be a difference between the two. I thought there might be. We look at the voting records, though, of all those folks that got elected to the House of Representatives who were members of the Tea Party. Well, with about the exception of 3 of them, at most, They all vote in lockstep with the agenda of the religious right, meaning that they are, to use a technical legal term because it would be inappropriate for me to use this in my ministerial role, they turn out to be as batshit crazy as the religious right does. No difference. Now listen, on Saturday of that event, 2 weekends ago, Ron Paul, I've known the guy a long time actually, Ron Paul got up and said what all of these candidates really believe, but he just said it. I got to give him some credit I always have for candor. He said, it's not just my opposition to abortion that's based on my belief in the Bible. Of course, abortion isn't even mentioned in the Bible, but let's leave that to the side. He said, all my policies come from the Bible. My military policy comes from the Bible. My foreign policy comes from the Bible. My tax policy comes from the Bible. He said, at the same breath in which he affirms his love of the Constitution, that really it's all about the Bible. And I can see some of you going, what is he talking about? I received some months ago, and I had a brief interview with this gentleman on my radio show called Culture Shocks, a man named Wayne Grudem. I suspect none of you have heard of it, but when I speak at a seminary, for example, which occasionally they allow me to do, there's always students there who know this book, Politics According to the Bible. It is a 600-page book that tells you what the Bible's answer is to every contemporary public policy matter. You go, every one? Yes, including which Air Force fighter planes should be purchased by the Air Force next. In case you wonder, it's the F-22 Raptor. No, honestly, it's right in the book. The Bible passages to prove it and to justify it. So what Ron Paul says is what these folks all believe. Newt believes that all these people who talk about the Constitution, it's always trumped by their own literal, albeit sometimes strangely literal, view of Christian Bible Scripture. This is where things get a little bit dicey, because you're laughing, because I want you to. But see, I'm not Bill Maher. Bill Maher is a comedian. He can get away with being, a comedian, I guess. And he's not a scientist either, of course, because going back to that virus issue about PowerPoint, he, of course, doesn't want you to get vaccinated because that might cause autism, which to me is kind of like, I don't know, believing in a flat earth. But that's okay. You don't have to be perfect. We'll get to that in a minute. Most of us do something other than just laugh about the things that are going on. We have to fight back against all of this, because who are these religious right Tea Partiers? 20 to 21% of the American electorate. That's a lot of people. Think of another group that has that control. There isn't any. 20 to 21, it's pretty consistent since the Reagan era, according to John C. Green, who is the scholar who has studied religion and politics most carefully, statistically in polling, since the 1970s. These are the people who, to get to my second point, that is a Christocentric panic attack, they believe that the world is out to get them. They don't just believe that we're out to get them, everybody is against them. The leadership of the Family Research Council of Ralph Reed's new organization, I thought we had gotten rid of him, we haven't. His new organization all tell people Christianity is under assault. I asked a guy who came up to me after a speech. He said, Mr. Lynn, you don't really understand the war against Christianity. I said, well, have you experienced this? He said, yes, of course, we all have. I said, give me an example. What's the latest thing you saw that demonstrates conclusively there's a war against Christianity? He said, well, just look at my firehouse. I said, well, I would. It's not here, but what are you talking about? He said they wouldn't let them put up the baby Jesus in a manger in the firehouse. I said, and that's, do you work in the firehouse? No, I don't work in it. Do you go to the fire? No, but I heard that that's what they did. They said something that's a government building and shouldn't have the baby Jesus in it. I said, well, man, if that's the biggest war going on, I'd say you don't have anything to worry about. And then he, of course, walked away. Religious right, how powerful are they? Here's breaking news, folks. You haven't read this in the paper yet. Next Wednesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, the Republicans on the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution have called a hearing on the decline of religious liberty in America. Yes, and it's going to feature Jay Sekulow, if he can come, his son Jordan Sekulow, if Jay can't come, and the Archbishop from someplace in Connecticut, and me. They asked me yesterday. I said I would show up. Now what happens? Though? Here's the interesting thing. Here's what we're going to hear. I know what we're going to hear. First of all, we're going to hear a lot of absolute lies. We're going to hear stories that are made up. We're going to hear, for example, about the little girl in Tennessee who got an F for doing a report on Jesus. That was on the front page of newspapers over a decade ago. They're still telling the story. She went to court. You know, one thing about courts that's really good, you often get the facts. You don't always get the truth, but you get a lot of facts. Here are the facts. She wrote a paper about Jesus. She did get an F. That's true. Here's why. She told her teacher she was going to do a report on drama. That was apparently too complex once she got into it. So she did it on Jesus and didn't even bother to tell him. And in other ways, it violated the academic description of the assignment. So she didn't do the assignment, so she got an F because she didn't do the right assignment. It's like if you're in a Latin class and you write your final exam in German, don't complain when you get an F. Do not complain when you get an F. Then they're going to tell other stories. They'll be discussing the Dodgeville, Wisconsin case. I love this case. A couple of Christmases ago, you know, there is a war against Christmas, right? Yeah. You haven't noticed that either. What do you people do? Yeah. I mean, it's going on all over the place. Like you go into a big store and somebody says, Happy Holidays. That's a war against Christmas. They're supposed to be saying Merry Christmas. In fact, in a couple of weeks, you'll see something coming out of some of these very groups that have been alluded to, a naughty and nice list. The nice list will be the stores whose circulars during the December season will talk about Christmas sales. The naughty list is the ones that will talk about holiday sales. Question, this is way beyond my legal or theological training. What happens if Pete's Porno Palace puts up a big neon sign that says, Merry Christmas? Is he naughty or nice? I don't know. If you know, write me an email. But this is the kind of stuff they're going to come up with. They're going to say there's a war against it. This is a congressional hearing by the Judiciary Committee's subcommittee on the United States Constitution. They're going to be, of course, claiming that any effort to deny them funds is discriminatory. Here's a victory we just had 2 days ago. This proves you can beat them. This is important because we can laugh at them and we can get all upset about them and lose sleep over them, but ultimately we have to beat them. South Bend, Indiana decided they were going to purchase a dollar store and its parking lot. These are stores that sell a lot of little tchotchkes for $1. They bought it, $1.3 million. That's good, $1.3 million. What are they going to do with it? I mean, their school budget's having trouble, so you think, well, maybe they'll give it to the public schools. No, they were going to turn it over for free to the local Catholic high school. $1.3 million. So we sued them, and we won with a Ronald Reagan-appointed judge. They came back and said, we made a mistake. We're actually going to sell it. We're going to put in bids for it, but we're not going to expect to get the $1.2 or $1.3 million we paid for it. So we sued them again. They said, you can't do that either. We just won that on Thursday. Because think of this, how absurd it is to think that you can purchase $1.2 million worth of property and then just give it for next to nothing to a religious group. And the only justification they had was, to get back to something John said, well, the Catholics will be using it most of the time, but you know, we'll have it open to the Protestants too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yes. They will be claiming, though, that any time you don't give them something, we just wrote a complaint letter. We haven't had a resolution. The city of Chicago is going to stop giving free water to nonprofit groups that are operating in the city, unless you're a religious one. Then they're going to continue to give you free water. The other nonprofits, the secular ones, are going to have to pay for the water. We don't think that's right. We don't think that's right, and we're going to see what we have to do about that as well. They are going to also talk about all kinds of other things which they consider to be anti-Christian. Any regulation whatsoever, any regulation of religion at all is considered an assault on Christianity. You know that the Alliance Defense Fund, those folks out in Arizona, they want to get tax exemptions to be able to be retained by religious groups only, not you, not the Bird-Watching Society, not any other nonprofit. They want pastors to be able to endorse candidates from the pulpit. Use the money. In fact, since money is speech, we know that now from the Supreme Court, that you can just, I guess, dump the collection plate proceeds into the coffers of an elected official or would-be elected official, too. They want that right as a church. That's a matter of the free exercise of religion, they say, and I'm sure that'll come up as well. How sweeping is all of this? Just about out of time. You know, James Carville and Paul Begala put up this sign during the first Clinton election campaign. It's the economy, stupid. It sounds like this time it's the same thing. It's not. It's religion, stupid. It's all about religion. And it's all about it, not in just the ways I've talked about, not the fact that everybody is pandering to the religious right and everybody wants to talk about how much they hate the same-sex marriage because that's, you know, likely to do away with, I mean, it's probably going to cause all kinds of, like, marital problems for, I don't know, Senator Vitter from Louisiana, for example. You know, because we know that. Those two gay men down the street from my house, if they're ever allowed to get married, man, I am going to be in paroxysms of lust myself, and undoubtedly the 42-year marriage I have with my wife, who is in Hawaii today while I'm here, it's going to go all down the drain. But what it does, not just for those folks, we expect them to talk more and more about religion. What's it do for Barack Obama? And I'll close on this. Nobody's perfect, I know that. But Barack Obama on these issues hasn't been perfect either. I know he talks about non-believers. He gives you a shout out. That's great. By the way, George Bush did that too. You just probably didn't believe him. Maybe some of you believe it about him. But when push comes to shove, almost everything he said he would do, said he believed in, he has not implemented. Remember when he said he would do away with the faith-based initiative that was giving just boatloads of money to religious organizations, including the ones who discriminate against non-Christians with your tax dollars? He has done nothing about it. He said, well, there were some few other little potential constitutional problems with the George Bush faith-based initiative. Let's form an advisory committee to discuss it. He formed it. I was then an advisor to the advisory committee. A lot of good that did. I spent a lot of time. I think Christmas Eve I was writing some kind of paper about it. I celebrate Christmas. I mean, some of you do too, I know, but I mean, I kind of celebrate it differently. But we write it. A couple modest little changes were promised, and none of those have been implemented. Just like, shouldn't we put up on the internet the groups that get the money for the faith-based initiative? No brainer, right? I was informed a couple months ago that they wouldn't be doing that. They wouldn't even be doing that. They don't even have the courage to tell you where your money is being spent. And I can tell you it is being spent for all kinds of absolute nonsense. I hate to go back to Louisiana, but including that crazy person down there who prays away drug addiction. You know, I'm sorry, folks, if you reject the medical model for addiction, I don't think you're going to cure one single person. The money's still flowing. This Supreme Court, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Elena Kagan, so far as justices are good about church-state. The administration, not so good. It, in fact, even recently, in a very important case that's going to cause us a huge amount of trouble all over the country, already has, they said that taxpayers of the state of Arizona do not have the right, do not have standing, the capacity to get into the courthouse to challenge the unconstitutional expenditure of money to go to private religious schools. They They, the Obama administration, said you don't get your foot in the door. All these rights we're talking about, all the rights that we have, that France doesn't have and India doesn't have, and they're only on paper unless you can vindicate them in the courts. That's what we learned back in the 30s and 40s when we started to go into court and say, we demand a vindication of our personal rights under the Constitution. If you can't get in the door, you can't win. You don't have an opportunity to be heard. The evidence doesn't get heard. And it is probably the single deepest disappointment with this administration, that they would join the crowd of right-wingers, and they won that case in the court 5-4, 5-4. Elena Kagan writing a great dissent saying you can't stop people from their day in court. But when you don't have the day in court, well, I guess maybe someday, all of us, and I hope it's together. That is to say, I hope, as I said at a big conference, some of you were at it in Los Angeles last year, I said, we can worry about, we should talk about the existence of God. Is there purpose in the universe? We ought to do that over a beer. But right now, we got a big problem. We're about to lose the Constitution of the United States. We're going to lose it in every place, the Congress, the presidency, and the courts. So before we get to that, is God a real question? I'd suggest we get real about the question of preserving the separation of church and state, which is the one thing that's holding our Constitution together right now and protecting the right of all of us to believe anything we want, screwy as it may seem to somebody else. So thanks for having me, and thanks for a month.